The door stood slightly open. I could hear laughter drifting out, my wife's voice blending with her sister's. I'd come home earlier than usual to surprise her, keys in one hand, the promotion letter tucked inside my jacket pocket. After 3 long years of effort, it had finally happened. Director level. A corner office. A company-provided apartment that would let us start saving properly for our own house. I eased the door wider, stepping in quietly, ready to share the good news. Completely useless in bed, my wife was saying. Truly pathetic. I have no idea how I've managed to fake enjoyment for so long. Her sister burst into laughter. Why do you stick around? The money. Plain and simple. He's reliable. Dull, but reliable. Once I get pregnant, I'll have it all sorted. He'll be over the moon about becoming a dad. He won't even suspect I'm involved with someone else. I stopped dead in the entrance. My name is Michael. I'm 36. In that instant, I realized the person who had walked through that door no longer existed. My wife stepped into the hallway, still chuckling, then froze when she saw me. The color drained from her face. Michael. But I was already moving past her toward the bedroom, hands calm even as everything inside me shifted violently. The promotion letter suddenly weighed like stone in my pocket. The keys felt impossibly heavy. She had been plotting this. Plotting to tie me down with a baby. Plotting to keep me as her financial safety net while she constructed a separate life with another man. I turned and met her gaze with eyes that felt foreign even to me. Tell me the whole truth, I said, voice low. Begin with who he is. That's when she realized I was no longer the husband she believed she knew. I had become something far more threatening. His name was David, a fitness trainer from her gym. The affair had been going on for 8 months, longer than the time she'd spent pretending affection for me. She spilled it all in a frantic stream, apparently hoping full disclosure would rescue her. It didn't. I listened without reacting. The cheating, the scheme to conceive, the schedule she'd outlined, the way she'd studied divorce and child support regulations, figuring out exactly how much she could pull from me afterward. I was nothing more than a tool, a paycheck that breathed. That night's sleep never came. I stayed in the spare room and compiled a mental inventory, not of what she'd taken from me, but of what I could remove from her. Her employment. She handled marketing for a family-run company, and her relatives had no clue about David. Her public image. Social platforms could be powerful when used strategically. Her sense of safety, the one thing she prized above everything. By dawn, I had outlined a course of action. I phoned her parents and requested a quick coffee meeting. They showed up puzzled and worried. I laid out the evidence. Texts between her and David, dating app activity on her device, screenshots of her admitting to her sister that she'd been simulating pleasure for years. Her mother's expression collapsed. Why show us this? Her father demanded. Because, I answered evenly, your daughter is preparing to ensnare me with a pregnancy. And I believed you deserved to know her true character before she repeats the pattern with anyone else. I walked out before they could reply. By mid-afternoon, my wife was blowing up my phone in desperation. Her parents had locked her out of the family company, frozen her account access, told her to pack and stay elsewhere until she sorted herself out. She was unraveling, but I was only beginning. David had no warning either. I paid a professional to capture images of him with my wife. Not merely the romance. That was their affair. But the instances where he messaged his real girlfriend, the one he'd been seeing before my wife inserted herself into his web of deception. That girlfriend soon received an unmarked envelope filled with proof. Pictures, conversations, timestamps, a complete record of his betrayal. She ended things with him almost immediately. I observed my wife crumble as David vanished from her world without a word. No closure, no farewell, just absence. He had taken what he desired from her and disappeared. Precisely the fate she had mapped out for me. The parallel felt almost scripted. At the same time, I launched another effort. My wife specialized in social media marketing, quite skilled, truthfully, which gave her logins to various client profiles. I uncovered irregularities in her spending logs. Not criminal, but questionable enough to prompt scrutiny. I submitted an anonymous tip to her firm's ethics hotline. An internal review began. She returned home looking ghostly. They're examining every expense. They suspect embezzlement. Did you do it? I inquired. No, but then there's no cause for concern, I replied smoothly. Yet we both understood the probe would ruin her professional standing regardless of the verdict. The mere suspicion would linger, Future hiring managers would notice the record. Recommendations would carry doubt. She had constructed her entire sense of self around achievement and admiration. I was methodically stripping both away. Within 3 weeks, she was unemployed. Her family had severed ties. David had vanished. And she remained in our apartment, the apartment now fully mine, surrounded only by the ruins of her decisions. At last, she asked the question I had anticipated. What do you want? And I smiled because she was finally truly listening. I want you to experience, I told her, what it's like when everything is stripped away. She looked at me with eyes emptied of schemes. Fear had taken their place. I had already spoken with a divorce attorney. The apartment belonged solely to me, bought with my pre-marriage bonus. Savings sat in protected accounts. The vehicle was in my name alone. Everything we had accumulated, I had earned independently. She possessed nothing. Please, she pleaded. I messed up. I was lost. You weren't lost, I cut in. You were intentional. You intended to ensnare me. You intended to weaponize a child. You intended to ruin me while profiting from my stability. She recoiled at every phrase, yet each one rang true. I placed the divorce documents before her. Straightforward. Precise. No alimony. No division of property. Merely the end of our vows. Sign these, and you may take the clothing in your wardrobe along with whatever self-respect remains. She signed without scanning the pages. Within days, she relocated to a tiny studio in an area we once mocked while passing through. Too run down, too distant, too far from the future we once pictured. Now it represented all she could manage on unemployment benefits. Her sister phoned me. You've ruined her, she accused. No, I answered. She ruined herself. I simply ensured the consequences caught up. I ended the call before more could be said. That evening I sat alone in my company apartment, the one tied to my director role, and registered only emptiness. The retribution was finished. So was the old version of me. 3 weeks into her changed existence, my wife tried to end her life. Pills. She dialed emergency services in time. Survived after having her stomach pumped and enduring a brief psychiatric commitment. I learned about it from her sister, who rang me in hysterics, blaming me entirely, claiming I had driven her over the edge, that I was heartless. Perhaps she had a point. I went to see her in the facility. She appeared diminished in the thin gown, reduced not merely physically but in spirit, finally grasping how thoroughly she had undone herself. I'm sorry, she murmured upon seeing me. I stayed silent. Simply sat opposite her in that clinical space and understood something painful. To dismantle her so completely, I had transformed into a stranger to myself. Someone able to witness another's collapse and label it fairness. She had deceived me. Undeniable. Yet my response had been meticulous, deliberate, merciless. I had exploited her weaknesses, turned her loved ones against her, engineered the ruin of her livelihood, executed it all with detached precision. When had that shift occurred? What comes next? She asked from the bed. I have no idea, I admitted truthfully. Because the energy poured into vengeance had left nothing for creation. I possessed the title, the residence, the grim satisfaction of her pain. But I was isolated, and isolation carried its own sentence. She left the facility on a Thursday, armed with medication and required counseling. I instructed my lawyer to revise the settlement terms. Not from compassion, I lacked that capacity now, but from an emerging awareness that total triumph carried unforeseen expenses. She received a modest monthly allowance. Not luxurious, but sufficient for basic survival. Enough to attempt recovery if she chose. She initially declined it. Her sister informed me she accepted only when alternatives vanished. I began attending therapy sessions myself. My counselor probed why total destruction had felt necessary, why vengeance had outweighed recovery, why I had elected to become an instrument of harm rather than simply advance. I lacked satisfying explanations. David had escaped unscathed. New partner, different location, no repercussions for his participation. That injustice lingered most bitterly. I had obliterated my wife while he simply departed. Fairness, it seemed, was far from impartial. It struck hardest at those already fragile. One day I spotted her at a local cafe. Thinner, worn, employed as a barista. A steep descent from her former role. She was reconstructing gradually from zero. When our eyes met, she held the gaze. No evasion, just quiet sorrow that felt like a silent charge. I understood then that I had prevailed in the conflict but forfeited the man I once was, the one eager to celebrate with her. In his place stood someone colder, someone who could observe suffering and find a measure of fulfillment. That was the true price of retribution, and I was only beginning to comprehend it. 6 months post-divorce, my ex-wife completed a nursing program at a local college. Her sister forwarded a graduation photo. My ex-wife, in academic regalia, genuinely smiling, perhaps for the first time since I had unraveled her world. She was piecing things back together. Slowly, laboriously, purposefully. I, meanwhile, remained stuck. The director role rang empty. The apartment felt sterile. The advancement that once thrilled me now resembled a hollow reward for a life traded for vengeance. I had carefully taken apart her profession, her family bonds, her stability, her emotional well-being, all with patience and exactness. And for what purpose? To claim victory? Victory had isolated me entirely. I began volunteering at a local outreach program, not for atonement, but from a deep need to construct rather than demolish. I led workshops on personal finance for individuals restarting their lives. Individuals much like my ex-wife. She never attended my sessions. Yet I glimpsed her occasionally in the center's study area, preparing for nursing certification. One evening we crossed paths at the beverage station. "Hello, Michael," she said softly. "Hello," I replied. "I'm starting night shifts at the hospital next month," she added. "It's modest, but it's genuine work." I nodded, words failing me. "I don't hate you," she continued. "I probably should, but I don't. I simply feel sorrow for the people we turned into because of my actions." She walked away before I could answer, and I realized her absolution, or its absence, no longer held power. I needed to grant it to myself, and that would prove the most difficult task yet. A year on, I met my ex-wife at a quiet cafe and offered an apology. Not because she demanded one, not because it could reverse the damage, but because I required the words spoken aloud, that I had dismantled her life not in blind fury, but through deliberate, calculated harshness, that I had turned her flaws into weapons and named it righteousness, that I had morphed into someone unrecognizable, and worse, someone unworthy of respect. "I know," she replied quietly. "I've understood that for some time. Does it alter anything?" I asked. "No," she said, "but it counts that you recognize it." We remained silent for a long stretch. She wore hospital scrubs beneath her coat, fresh from a shift spent aiding others' recovery. I wore the attire of an executive who had learned that achievement without character was meaningless. "I'm not seeking forgiveness," I told her. "I'm simply stating that I see my actions clearly now, and I'm working to change." She inclined her head. "That's sufficient." It wasn't reunion. It wasn't absolution. It was merely two individuals who had shattered one another attempting to grasp how it happened and who they had become afterward. I had spent months methodically taking apart her career, her family connections, her financial foundation, her psychological stability, all with the exactness of a flawless strategy. And I had labeled it justice. But justice, I discovered too late, demands restraint. It requires knowing when to halt before total ruin. It requires grasping that revenge is a toxin you swallow while hoping the other person perishes. My ex-wife had swallowed pills and lived. She had reconstructed. She had become a nurse devoted to mending rather than breaking. I was still learning to do likewise.